Welcome back to Techvisa. This is episode number 16. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel for all the latest in Australian immigration news. So we've got some exciting announcements and developments around the skilled visa program here in Australia. We've got a special episode for you today. So we got Sam Bricknell, co-founder and director here at Techvisa. And then we got Ben Rice dialing in from the Tech Council of Australia. So he's head of policy. Sam's been working really closely with the Tech Council of Australia to get these changes implemented. And Ben's sort of been spearheading the project on the Tech Council end. From the announcement, it looks like a lot of the recommendations and suggestions that you guys had have actually got across the line. So Sam, I'm interested to hear from your side how these discussions went and what it looked like from a process perspective.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've been lucky as well. So we've been part of Tech Council for a couple of years now. And, there's been a whole team in there who've been behind all of this. And it's always discussions around how we can implement things or how we can kind of make suggestions to just kind of make some changes that work in the favor of companies, that doesn't slow down process. And what we like to do is work with the companies on our side of things, and they identify problems that they have when they're going through the process and everything. And then we can relay that back to the TCA as well. And it's never kind of going back and it's not complaints or anything. It's just bringing up real life situations. We're on the coalface, and then hopefully TCA can kind of take that to Home Affairs or use it as part of the submission to say, these are some of the changes, these are some of the challenges, and then those things kind of come through, which we've been lucky that's kind of happened this time.
Yeah, for sure. And then I guess, Ben, from your side as well, how has that process looked working with the department and actually getting these changes across the line?
Yeah, so we're really lucky to be able to work with members like Techvisa who have specialist expertise and really focus on this stuff as core business. But actually what we found is that migration is of huge interest to almost all of our members. We know that workforce shortages are the number one issue facing the tech sector in Australia. And so the changes that are introduced by the government last week are going to be really important to help sort of fix a lot of those workforce shortages that we've found. So it's been really great working with members like Techvisa. Equally, it's been fantastic working with the department and with the Minister's office as well on the consultation process.
And I guess, from our side too, because whenever we go to events, whenever we're listening to panels talk and everything, it's the same challenges that always pop up. And one of the main ones that comes up at the start of every conversation is talent. So it's not just about immigration or anything. It's about just finding talent in the first place. Competitive market, especially post-COVID. That's where it all kind of started, I guess. Closed borders, not as much talent kind of coming in, and hard to train up people in these new sectors. So it's always been a challenge, and it's just that talent piece, and everyone is stealing from each other as well. And so salaries got driven up, and okay, how does all of this kind of come back in and I guess get back to not where it was, but just back in check compared to the trajectory it was on before?
One of the big announcements that was made was the introduction of this new skills in demand visa. So I'm interested to hear from your side, the suggestions and recommendations that you made in regards to the introduction of this new potentially visa subclass. Are you happy with the outcome?
Yeah, definitely. There are a couple of key parts to the skills in demand visa, and one of them is the specialist skills pathway that we really strongly pushed for. A couple of different aspects of that we think are really positive as part of that. One of them is the salary threshold, which has been set at 135,000. We think that's really important to make sure that we're getting through the system's skilled workers in that higher paid range. It also reduces the risk of exploitation of lower paid workers that we see in other parts of the migration system. The other really important part is the 7-day service standard. So the department is committing to a median time of 7 days from when you apply to the visa for when it's processed. And that's going to mean that Australia is competitive against countries like Singapore and Canada, where, they do have these really fast turnaround times. When you're a tech worker looking at where to migrate to, if you're having to wait 6 months for a visa, but you can go to a country where you can get an answer in 7 days, that really factors in as well.
And I guess going off the back of what Zach said just then as well, so obviously happy with where a lot of things landed. So the salary threshold, I think, is pretty fair in terms of, you've got to be highly skilled to attract that amount, and it shows that, okay, there's concessions that kind of go as part of that. You also said before that there's a few things which, kind of lobbied for or asked for, but didn't quite get to that point just yet. So, I mean, what are some of those ones?
Well, I think one of the things that we were pushing for originally was the maintaining the extension to post-study work rights that came in after the pandemic that allowed international students to stay an additional couple of years after their studies in Australia. We pushed for that to maintain, but look, we really recognise that there's a need to get the migration level back down to a sort of pre-pandemic normal, if you will. Obviously, one of the simplest and sort of best ways of doing that is to revert those post-study work rights. So Can understand where the government's coming from and the reality that we're dealing with here as well.
It's finding that middle ground, isn't it? It's like if you push too hard, then very little gets through. It's making sure that, you know, most people are happy from most sides in this whole situation as well. Obviously, there's some cohorts that may not necessarily have got everything they wanted, but likewise, it's like we kind of, not everything that was asked for from our side got through, but majority of it, and I think the really important stuff as well. One of those other things as well was just about that mobility. It's been huge for a lot of our clients. So if you move between companies, for example, it resets the timing for you to be able to apply for permanent residency, just the time that you've got in between as well. Like it added so much stress to people through no fault of their own. So say they're made redundant in a role, you've got 60 days, go find something else. And when you throw into the mix that a company needs to advertise for 28 days of that as well, okay, you've got 30 days to find a job, interview for it however many times, get an offer, then get an application lodged, I'll get it advertising up to then lodge in time. There was a lot of aspects there that kind of added stress, which didn't need to be there. So that moving out to 180 days instead of the current 60 days, I think is a positive one as well. So I guess based on those couple of things, what are the timelines? Like when do you see these things coming into play?
Yeah, so the government set out a timeline where we're going to see most of the changes implemented by the end of next year. And there'll be some consultation that government will run through 2024 and some decisions that they're going to take immediately, like streamlining the labour market testing and removing the requirement to have to post jobs through Workforce Australia. Other changes will take a little bit more time to develop, either through, because we need to develop the policy or just getting those changes through the parliament. But by the end of next year, the government set that timeline that we'll see most of those changes implemented.
And LMT is key. I mean, that's one of the biggest pain points for most of our clients, and Workforce Australia has added more stress to that than was ever really needed. So even for people to set up an account in the first place, link in their director's ID, you have no idea how many times we had to answer that question with our clients, and people still struggle. Like you give kind of step-by-step guide, and it's not an easy process. Taking that out doesn't take away from the fact that you've advertised locally, that you have looked locally. And the whole thing I say to people too is you don't go through this process if you don't have to. But if it's the right person for the right role and it means you get someone senior in, then it's obviously, it's something that you definitely go through. So it's not going away, I guess is what you're saying there, is it? It's still in play, but Workforce Australia is no longer required.
Yeah, and so they're also extending the validity period from 4 to 6 months, which we think is really important part of that as well.
I mean, I guess just to clarify for people, before if you advertise within the last 4 months, you could use those ads. Now that's gone out to 6 months of advertising. If you advertise within the last 6 months, then that can still be used towards the application.
So Ben, another key aspect, something that we rely on when we process 482 visas now are skilled occupation lists. This is no longer going to be a thing for the specialist skills pathway. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that? Are we just relying heavily on that 135 grand salary threshold to sort of define what a specialist role is? Because obviously there's going to be no occupation lists moving forward.
Yeah, so that's right. So they're removing the occupation lists, but what they are doing is keeping a few roles that won't be eligible for the skills pathway. So that's trade roles, machinery operators, labourers and drivers. Really what they're doing is using that salary threshold as the real driver there. We know that tech workers are some of the highest paid workers in Australia, and so setting that threshold at that level will mean that we are getting through those high-skilled tech workers that we know companies here desperately need.
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing, actually. So we got a few clients where some of the roles just don't exist, and let alone fit into categories which are on an occupation list, which has been around for decades. So rather than kind of square peg, round hole these into occupations which kind of fit but don't really, the removal of these means that, they are highly skilled. They are people coming in who are going to be able to create an ecosystem underneath them as well. So you've got someone in there, top of their game, and then all of a sudden grads locally have a pathway. They can see someone locally in the country who they can work underneath, and they don't have to take their skills overseas. So it actually helps to really build out the ecosystem locally. We've had a couple of really good experiences where clients have really struggled with that piece, finding the right occupation to fit, and going to TCA and just kind of mentioning these things as well. And if it's in food tech or space or whatever it is, or even blockchain is another good example. They don't fit. How can we address this? And this is what these changes have actually done. It's addressed it. It's just said, a lot of these things don't fit perfectly. So this actually gives you the options when that's the case. The good thing is, and I think we've spoken about quite a bit with TCA as well, is just the accreditation that bigger companies have, giving them an advantage, I guess. So when they're going through a process of nominating someone, okay, auto approvals on nominations, quicker processing on visas, not having the need to do police checks if you get a statement signed to say that they're of good character. Things like that just mean, okay, it's a much quicker process, so they've got competitive advantage. But it sounds like from the changes, the accreditation could actually be extended to startups and scale-ups now who have got funding from VCs. Is that right? And can you talk through that in a bit more detail?
Startups are the engine of an economy, and we know that they face the same recruitment challenges as other businesses across the Australian economy, and that's why TCA has worked really closely with the government to make sure that those firms are allowed to become accredited. I think that's just government acknowledging the important role that these startups are going to play and opening up that sponsored program to those smaller firms. Like you say, we know that they've been disadvantaged by the existing settings, and I think this is just about leveling the playing field and making sure that those businesses have access to the same pathways as others.
I guess the line has to be drawn at some stage, right? It can't be extended to everybody. So if it's a bootstrap business or something, or haven't got funding from a VC that's listed, then obviously they don't have that same advantage. But if they are paying above that income threshold and they do fit into the program anyway, it won't be a massive disadvantage based on the fact it's still going to be quick processing time, and there's still those rolling back of the LM2 requirements and things too.
Yeah, and that was one of the key things that we recommended to government, was around putting in some of those risk management factors, like having VC backing from an accredited VC provider as well.
Ben, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on today. Sam, likewise. And if you did enjoy this video, give it a thumbs up, and until next time, see ya.